All right, good afternoon, everyone. This is Damon Caskey speaking on the OpenBOR live session number 2. Before I jump into answering questions, I'm going to go over a couple of housekeeping things, answer some lingering stuff. First of all, I had this idea that I might demonstrate things with a drawing pad, but that didn't plan out. It doesn't belong to me. It's just something I borrowed, thinking that I might buy one, but man, I would rather just stick with a mouse. So still going to be a little bit slow when I try to draw out examples, but I do have a paint window ready to hopefully, I guess, draw some lines and boxes here and there that might illustrate what I'm talking about a little better. YouTube is not receiving enough video, maintain smooth streaming. Well, according to YouTube, some of this might be stuttery, and I will have to apologize for that. So to open things up, I want to answer a couple of I guess, prerequisite questions. The first was actually sent to me in an email, and it was not about the engine at all. It was actually about my linguistic patterns. I'm not going to name the person's name at all because they requested privacy and again contacted me through email. As far as I know, this person isn't even part of the Chronocrash community, so I was sort of surprised to hear from them. Anyway, that person asked me to refrain from using phrases like you guys because it is not gender neutral. So my response to that is going to have to be, while I respect the request and I respect that you were polite and came to me in private about it, when I say you guys, that is a regional colloquialism meaning everyone present. It's not meant as an assumption that everyone watching this video just happens to be a binary heterosexual male. I was raised by women, and I believe that you show respect to women, or for that matter, any gender, any binary, non-binary, whatever you happen to be. I don't really care. I fully respect you and your beliefs and your wishes, but you are going to have to respect in turn that my speaking patterns are a product of years of education, life experience, and the region that I was raised in, and they are not going to change. If that's a problem, then all I can say is nobody's holding a gun to your head to watch this video. Now, on to a question posed by Kimono. He was a little bit worried that by starting these videos, I wouldn't be posting questions, or excuse me, wouldn't be answering questions in the forum, or that my answers might be a little bit harder to find. Kimono, I want to ameliorate that worry for you. This video is meant as a supplement. It's really just for questions that would take me forever to type out answers in the forum and that are very difficult to explain through text. So it's just, if you prefer the text, then read the forum. If you want to see me answer things live, you can come onto the video. They are meant to go hand in hand. I'm not replacing one with the other. And a third thing I want to jump right into is I rewatched the live feed that I did last time, and boy, when I was explaining how OpenBOR frames worked, man, that explanation was so convoluted, it confused me, and I'm the one who wrote the code for it. So I'm going to try and explain that a little bit better because it's something that is very fundamental to how the engine works, and you need to understand that in order to understand some of the questions you were asking, like about collision and things like that. So let me open up the Paint program here, and hopefully you can see it okay. So right here, I've just drawn a little box and it says model. And as you know, whenever entities are spawned in OpenBOR, they are sourced from models, and models come from the model sheets. So models in turn have dozens and dozens of properties. I'm just going to represent these with little lines. So one of these properties might be the model's hit points. The next property might be its defense attributes. And the next one that we're going to concern ourselves with would be animations. So I'm going to draw a little box here and just put text in there for us to see. Animations. Okay. So, and if you have a problem with zooming on this, just try to follow along with my voice because well, actually, wait, I can zoom this. There, how's that? So we have models and we have animations, right? And those are a one-to-many relationship, meaning you can have one model and its animation property can store multiple animations, and we've referenced those by an index number. That's what those animation constants are that you use in script, or when you put text into the model sheets, the engine just reinterprets those into numerics and calls the animations from there. Now here's where things get a little bit tricky. You can't see what I'm drawing. Okay, let me have a look at the, oh, well, there's a good reason for that. Hang on, guys. My first royal screw up of the day. Let's open up. There we go. How's that? Give it a second for the stream to catch up here. There we go. I can see it now. So you should be able to see the paint stream. See if I can expand it just a little bit. There we go. Okay. I am sorry, gentlemen. I am still getting the hang of operating streaming software, so you'll just have to bear with me. Now, as I was saying, you have a model and it has various properties. Some of those properties are just, they're singular properties. It's a one-to-one. So a model only has one hit point property, but it has multiple animations. We refer to those by index key. Okay, so logically, you would think that we would next have animation properties like so. So this would be, say, the animation's range. This would be the animation's current frame. And then we would actually have the frames like this. So I'm going to draw a little box here. And I'm going to say frames. So now you have a one-to-many relationship. One model, lots of animations. One animation, lots of frames. But the engine does not work like that at all. There just is no such thing as a frames array. And that's where it can get a little bit confusing. So let's just wipe that away. Guess I should have picked a bigger eraser. And what we get instead is some animation properties are one-to-one, like for instance, the range. You only have one range per animation. But you can have multiple sprites per animation. So we're gonna draw a box here, and this would be our sprites container. Find my text here. Oops. Yes, let's type text. That makes sense. Sprite. And now when we want to show a frame, the engine keeps track of what frame numeric, i.e. frame index, and it goes to the animation property sprite, which is actually an array of sprites. And so sprite 0 is what you would think of as the frame 0. And then we would create another, let's make another property. So let's say we would have collision, and I promise this will make a little bit more sense when I'm all done. So let's hope I didn't spell that or misspell that, collision. All right, so you have animation, and then you have the one-to-many property of sprites and the one-to-many property of collision. Now, when the engine needs to know what frame it is displaying, it tracks a numeric index, which is another animation property that's just a one-to-one, and then it goes to sprite. And sprites are one-to-many to animations. So it's going to say, if we're on frame 2, remember everything is 0 indexed, okay, give me sprite 1, and then give me collision 1. And that's going to continue for everything that we consider a frame property. So anything that is a frame is really just an array that is tied to animations. So I hope that makes a little bit more sense. Instead of being an array of frames that then has frame properties, you have lots and lots of arrays tied to animations. Now, this seems absolutely insane, but there is a very good reason for it. So I'm going to go back to the model structure to explain how this works. Now remember, models have lots of properties, animations have lots of properties. So these properties are made up from a static structure. So when we define a model or create a model, every single one of these properties here has to be allocated, and it consumes a little bit of memory. The same goes for animations. So you have the model, and each one of its properties consumes a small amount of memory, and then each animation consumes some memory. So if we were to do the same thing with frames, and then all the frame properties, basically, so you're multiplying your memory consumption here, and then you would be multiplying it one more time here with a frame structure that has to be statically allocated. And of course, as you know, frames have lots and lots and lots and lots of properties. So by keeping the so-called frame as multiple arrays off the animation, the only memory that is statically allocated is the property that actually refers to the array, which is much smaller than the array itself. So for instance, if we only have an animation, or excuse me, if we only have an animation that has just some basic frames in it, and it doesn't even have any collision, well then we don't have to allocate memory for that collision array. And that is a huge, huge savings. Without that, the engine would pretty much only be runnable on a PC. You would even have trouble running it on Androids. So I hope that makes a little bit more sense than the explanation I gave before, and maybe with that, the collision explanation will make a little bit more sense from the last video. Now, I'm ready for some live questions, so let's see what we've got on here. Malik, no, you're asking, so basically all the sprites and the animations are frames. That's not really how it works. I focused on the sprites a little bit just because that's what's used more commonly. What I'm saying is that there's no such thing as a frame in the engine code. We actually build a frame live from multiple arrays that are actually just animation properties. Does that make more sense? While I'm waiting for a reply, let me see if I can move my ugly mug here over to the far right of the screen and get it out of the way. There we go. All right then, ready for some live questions. So fire away, gentlemen. Or ladies, or whatever your case happens to be. Yeah, Kratos, model properties are really important, and here's where it's going to get even more confusing a little bit later on. I'm going to have to, well, I might as well explain now before I get any specific questions. So the reason that some properties don't actually exist as entity properties, brought up one, maximum hit points, for instance, is as another, I guess, code saving feature and memory saving feature, rather than keeping a, I know there's a debug text function. How do I use it? Give me just a moment and I'll see if I can answer that, Malik. So as I was saying, when an entity is first spawned into play, it actually gets a copy of the model it was created from. And then that copy of the model data serves as the static properties that we don't expect to change. So the entity has a hit point property, and then its copy of the model is the maximum hit points. So one of the things that I don't like about the current script engine right now is that it kind of hides a lot of that stuff and it can get really confusing really quick. So when you, for instance, say change entity property max HP, what you're really doing is changing that entity's model hit points property. And then because that is what it's using as the maximum hit points, you see on the screen what you believe to be a maximum hit point property being modified. That's one of the things that I'm going to fix in the new script engine. And when I say fix, by the way, I'm adding new commands. Okay, the legacy commands aren't going anywhere, so no backward compatibility is going to be broken. But anyway, I'm going to give you direct access to all of those model properties. So you will be able to modify, well, first you'll be able to get a model. So you'll be able to modify the base model that everything is spawned from. You'll also be able to modify the model copy that every entity creates. So that pretty much will give you absolute total control over the entity, and you won't have any confusion about, okay, well, why is this property available to the entity and why is this property not? Well, because a lot of those were just model properties. Okay, so moving on to your question, Malik. I know there is a debug text function. How do I use it? So I'm not really 100% following. What do you mean by debug text? Are you talking about when the engine compiles or to put text on the screen to tell you things? In the source code. Okay, I'm still not 100% following you. I guess what I mean is what text output are you looking for? Like when do you actually want to see the text? I mean, there's no there's no debug function, at least that I'm aware of, that's going to put a lot of things up onto the screen while you're playing the game. There is a debug function you can use when you're compiling the engine, but that's about it. So if I want to show some values in source code string, yeah, there's no such function that I'm aware of. And if there is, it's something that was put in before I came along because I have not seen any such thing in the source code. The only thing that is there is we have a couple of verbose debug switches that will absolutely just flood the log with data, but it doesn't put anything on screen. If you want to put something up on screen, then you kind of have to write it into the source code yourself, which, I mean, I've done that now and again. I'll put debug traces in to throw stuff in the log or to put text on screen, but that's custom code that I write on the fly. That's not something that's built into the engine. And by the way, sorry about all the long pauses. There seems to be a delay in the stream, so there's a little bit of time before you actually hear me speaking and before I can get your answers back. So if I just seem to be sitting here in silence, that's just me waiting on your reply. I believe debug printf prints to the log, but to be honest, when you bring that function up, I'm not 100% sure. So I'm gonna have to file that question away and experiment a little bit when we're off the video, and I guess I'll try to answer you in the forum. Hmm. Well, I'm sure he did, but again, the thing about that is I can put text on the screen myself. You can write custom code into the engine to put text on screen. That does not mean there is a built-in function to do it. I will experiment with debug printf. I believe that is a logging function, but I just can't tell you for sure right now. Again, if you want to put text on the screen, the best thing to do is just to write it in the source code. You have editing access, so that's the route I would go. If there is a built-in function, I will find it. I'm just not aware of any such thing at the moment. Let's see if I can adjust something here. Can you stop input but still use key scripts? So by that, I'm guessing you mean you want to cause the engine to ignore all native input, but still, or excuse me, but still respond to key events. Is that, am I understanding you correctly? So while I wait for clarification on your first question, to answer your second, unfortunately, you can't change the damage directly because the damage object, once it has been populated, that's it. It goes into global variables into the engine. Now, that doesn't mean you can't do it functionally speaking. You just can't do it lickety split with one little script. You would have to run a do attack event, and from there, you more or less create your own damage system on a particular hit. Because right now, the damage object, again, it's not directly accessible to script. You can get the damage that was applied, and you can even put the hit points back, but you can't just say, okay, the entity took such and such damage. I really want it to take this amount of damage. That option isn't available at the moment unless you're willing to do some real deep dive into the scripting. As far as capturing input and stopping the native functionality, yes, you can absolutely do that. There are a couple of ways. One is to, in the case of a single input press, you can always just nullify the key so that the engine ignores it. Or if it's a holding press, there is a function, and The funny thing is, I wrote it, but I don't remember what it was called, so you'll have to give me a second to find it. It is an event script that allows you to capture key inputs before the engine ever reads them, and then you can change what those key inputs are. Let's see. What we'll do to find it is execute method. Let's see. Oh, we need to be in the engine's OpenBOR. So anytime the engine executes a script in native code, it starts with execute underscore. So I'm just going to run a simple function to find it, take damage, find a self, on pane, on fall, on block, on W, in hole, on block. Execute on spawn script, on model copy. It's not entity key, level key. Okay. Yes, oh, that just making sure, I believe I found it. Okay, it is called input script. So input script runs before everything. It runs before all the common key scripts, and it runs before the native key handling. So what input script will allow you to do is change what the key actually is before the engine receives it. So you could change the key constant, say from attack to jump or left to right, which would be really handy if you want to do stuff like the classic interface screw, say like in Revenge of Shinobi, or I'm sorry, Shinobi 3, when the second boss reverses your controls. This would be where you would do it, is with execute input script. Now, rather than just changing the control, you can also just absolutely nullify it, and the engine won't even see it. And then, of course, you can put in your own code to do whatever you want to do and go from there. And the reason, Kratos, you probably had some trouble with this, and so did I, when you try to use key scripts to nullify inputs, is a single press you can nullify, but the way the engine works is it's updating and reading the key on every single engine cycle. So even though your script tries to nullify the key, the engine just sees the key anyway as soon as the cycle continues, and you don't actually nullify it until your script comes back around. So there's really nothing you can do to stop that key from functioning unless you change it before the engine ever sees it. And that's what this input script all is for. And I'll tell you what I'll do. I will put some code examples onto the forum. I'll create a GIST and post it up just to kind of give you some ideas. Again, the main reason that it's there is to do like control scrambling, but if you want to write absolute 100% custom code or custom key codes and the engine doesn't do anything with those keys, this is also where you would go. Optimization, sure, fire away. I'll see what I can do. Memory and CPU usage. Okay. I mean, that's kind of general. What are there any particular scripts you're looking for, or are you just looking for general optimization tips? Variables, local, global, entity. Okay. Well, I'll take them as they come since we've got the delay here. When it comes to variables, the local and the global and entity variables all use the same amount of memory, but they use them in different ways. So it really kind of depends on what you're doing with the script. Now, the advantage of a local variable as opposed to a global variable isn't so much one of memory usage as it is of memory cleanup. So a local variable, and I've explained this in text, but I know it's really kind of hard to conceptualize. So let me type up a script here to kind of show you what I'm talking about. So let's start with a new file. Let's see, just a general text file. Don't really care. Um, okay, actually that's not what I wanted to do, my bad. Okay, a C file. So let's say we are working in an animation script. And of course, animation scripts have three, well, every script has three built-in native functions that are run. They are on create, on destroy, helps if you know how to spell, on destroy, and of course you have main. Now what a local variable will do, let's say I wanted to print hello world in main, but I wanted to define it in onCreate. So I could do something like this. I would say set local var, and of course we have the identifier, and we're just going to say for our purposes here, the variable's name is x. And the value is hello world. Okay, now down in main, I want to put that into the log. So what I will do is, let's get that variable. So let's say char hello world x equals get local var and then x, oops, and then of course I will log it, and that's going to print it to the log. So when the animation script first opens, it sets this local var x to hello world, and then in the main we get that local var, we stick it in a function var, and then we output it. So far this isn't really anything mind-blowing, right? Can't see. I'm sorry, I forgot to switch over from Paint. Goodness gracious, guys. Bear with me. Let me add I need to add another capture here. Window capture, Visual Studio Custom. And you should be able to see it now. I'm going to wait for just a second for it to catch up and let me know if you are able to see it correctly. All right, since we since nobody could see what I was doing, I'm going to go over this again real quick. So again, we have this, just imagine this is an animation script or an update script or whatever. Just for our purposes, let's say it's an animation script on an entity, right? Okay, so we have the three main native functions the engine runs. They are onCreate, onDestroy, on and main. And just in case anyone here is not familiar with these, onCreate runs when the script first loads into existence. OnDestroy runs when the script is destroyed. And of course, main runs every time the script event fires. So in the animation script, main is going to run every time the engine updates a frame. OnDestroy when the entity first spawns because, well, it's an animation script. And onCreate will, or excuse me, onDestroy will run when the entity is despawned, and onCreate is going to run when it is first spawned. So in our onCreate, when the entity first spawns into existence, this animation script is going to set a local variable called x and give it a value of hello world. Then down here, every time the entity updates its frame, we are going to get that local variable, use it to populate a function variable, and then we're going to spit that out to the log. So we're basically going to see hello world a whole lot in the log. What's really great about this particular local var though is I don't have to worry about any other entity's animation script confusing it with this. So this local var belongs to this entity's animation script and only this entity's animation script. So in another entity's animation script, I could set a local var called x and name it hello world, how are you today? And it's not going to interfere with this one at all. The other advantage it gives us is when this script is destroyed, and we don't even have to worry about the onDestroy event, this is automatic. When this script is destroyed, any variables, any local variables that are tied to it are wiped away instantly. So there's no worry about any sort of cleanup. So this makes local variables very handy. If you know anything about object-oriented programming, that's how I tend to think of them. They're like class variables. So you can think of this as a class, and this is your object variable, if that's a way that helps you. But anyway, yes, so it's not that local vars use less space than global variables. They're just much easier to keep track of. You don't have to worry about cleaning them up. You don't have to worry about them getting stuck in saved games. You don't have to worry about them going out and causing issues in your scope. They are just right here as a way for you to pass information between functions. Now, another thing that they're really handy for, it's not just passing info from function to function, it's also passing information from iteration to iteration. So remember, the local var stays alive as long as this script does. So say I wanted a timer of some sort. I just kind of wanted a counter, and when that counter reached 10, I wanted to say hello world. So I could say something to the effect of set local, let's see, set local var timer. Let's say I need an integer value. Let's go back up here. Int x equals get local var. Let's see, timer, and that's all that I need. Okay. Let's see, let's call that timer just to make sure it makes a little more sense. So, okay, so when this main runs, I get a local var called timer, and I put it into a function var called timer. And since OpenBOR variables, if they are not initialized, come up as blank, then let's just put something in here to make sure the timer is 0 since we want to increment it. So if the timer is blank or 0, timer equals 0. All right, the next thing we'll do is we'll increment the timer, increment, and finally, let's dump it into the local var. And then let's give it some functionality. So let's say if timer is greater than or equal to 10, then we'll do the work of dumping our other local variable into the log. So this is a great use of local vars, is information that we need across every iteration of a script. So this is how we can keep our timer going, and we don't need a global variable for it. So when this script is done, our timer is destroyed, it's cleared out of memory, and we don't even have to worry about it. Does that make sense about local vars? While I wait for your answer on that, I'm going to go ahead and give you a tip when it comes to some speed optimizations. So underneath the hood, when you create global variables, entity variables, or local variables, there are two types. You have text key, or we can say native key if you like, and indexed key. And depending upon which one you use, the engine stores it in one of two ways. If you use a text key, like what I did here when I set this local variable "x," then the engine stores this variable underneath the hood as a doubly linked list, or a double linked list if you prefer. And in order to find that X variable, to modify it, it has to do a line search through that linked list. So basically it's just going to go through the nodes until it finds one with name matching X, and then it's going to perform the get or the set function on it. Now, if you use a numeric key like this, so if I were to say set local var, and let's just make up a number, 12, hello world. When that variable is initialized, the engine just dumps it into a garden variety variable in C code. And that variable is referenced by its index. So it's referenced by number 12. The engine does everything that it possibly can to optimize variables underneath the hood when it comes to speed with that doubly linked list. It's actually a hash table. So the searches with strings are pretty darn fast, but they still cannot compete with an integer search. Integers are always going to be faster. That's what computers are designed around. So if you want to wring every last ounce of speed out of something, you might want to consider using a numeric for your local vars, your global vars, or your entity variables. Now that said, don't forget that in OpenBOR you can define constants, and I highly recommend you do. So I would say define hello world key as 12, and then I'm going to dump it in here. And I wrote an entire tutorial on how constants are used, so I'm not going to get into a whole lot of details here, but these constants, actually they're called macros. These macros are absolutely 100% free. They are only initialized at runtime, and they are more or less a glorified copy-paste operation. So you don't have to worry about these consuming any memory at all, and they will let you keep track of, in a human-readable manner, all of your indexes. Now, as far as entity variables are concerned, they are very similar to global vars. They are 100% global. You can access an entity variable anytime, anywhere from any script. If you have information that you want to keep about an entity, then I would recommend you use an entity variable because it also has a self-cleaning function. Now, it is not destroyed with the script that it belongs to because it doesn't belong to a script, but it is destroyed when the entity is removed from play. So that way you don't have to worry about cleaning up an entity var. Now, one thing you do want to watch out for with entity vars is the pointer that identifies that entity may be reused by another entity. So if I were to, interesting, this explains why the config files menu. Yes, that is correct, Kratos. Oh, and I just got a request to zoom in just a bit. Sorry about that. Let's try 150%. And let me move my search window down a little bit. That may be a little too big. How about 120%? Now, as far as global vars are concerned, same thing as local vars in the way that you use them, except of course global vars are global. They don't go away. If you are running a saved game, they are saved through the save game, which that's a really cool feature of global variables. But obviously, if you don't account for that, you can have some massive bugs show up out of your script. Like, why is this global var being populated? I turned the engine off. Well, if you load up a save game, it's going to keep all those global variables and just reload them again. So that's something you need to keep in mind about global variables. The other issue with global variables is it's their strength and their weakness. They are in the global scope. So you have to be very careful that you don't reuse the identifiers for them. And of course, since global vars aren't cleaned up automatically in any way, shape, or form, you can have memory leaks with global vars very quickly. So as far as optimization purposes go, I always recommend using the smallest scope you can get away with. So if you can use a local variable, use a local variable because then your garbage cleanup is handled for you. The next level up, if you need something global to the entity, use an entity var because then that's going to be cleaned up with the entity. And then after that, if you absolutely have to have some value that is global to your entire module, then use the global variable for that. Don't just because that's a mistake I do see a lot with scripting. Don't just write up a global variable because it's easy. I mean, I know it's tempting. I do it too sometimes, but it's sooner or later going to bite you in the rear end. Malik, if I load a sample, do they have to be freed? If so, how to free them? You do not have to free sound samples. They are freed automatically when you shut the engine down. However, if you want to free them, it's very easy to do. Let me get rid of this code that I've been writing here in main. Let's see, and let me give you an example. So let's say int my sound. Let's see, load sample, if I'm remembering the function correctly, load sample. Data sounds my sample dot wave. All right, now I have my sound. When I want to get rid of that, I just need to get that sound reference and pass it to the free function. And that is all you need. That will eliminate the sound. If I load a sprite to entity variable, will it be freed for me? No. The only thing that is freed is the entity variable itself, not the sprite. And sprites you do have to free before you shut down the engine. If you don't, the engine will go ahead and free it for you, but it's going to put some nasty grams into the log and make your users, make them believe that you don't know what you're doing. So for sprites, it's the same thing. Let's see, sprites are pointers, so we'll say void load sprite. That's bad typing on my part. Load sprite, data, I don't know, let's see. Let's just say sprite folder. my sprite ping, and then later on, we just pass that to the free function. And that is how you handle freeing sprites. And while I'm on the subject, that also applies to arrays. If you create an array in script, that allocates some memory in the engine, and you have to refer to that variable by its pointer, or excuse me, refer to that array by its pointer, and you also need to free it the same way. So let's just do a quick example of that. So let's say void my array. We'll create an array with a size of 5, and then this is starting to get repetitive, my array. I'm trying to use global only when a variable needs to be shared by all different scripts like Mint. And that is exactly how you should treat global variables. That is what they are for. When you have to have some variables that are global to the module, then fine, use a global variable. Just like I said before, try to avoid using them for stuff that is inter-function within a script or inter-entity, because that's where entity variables and local variables shine the best. A last question about variables. Fire away, sir. How to configure the variable limits on the script text file correctly, and when is it really needed? Gosh, there's no hard and fast rule for that. As far as the syntax, I forget. That's really sad, but because I can't remember all the little minutia. So I can look up the syntax later on, and I'll post it to the forum if you need. But I have the feeling what you're really asking for is like, what's the best number of variables to allocate. So as far as local vars, script vars, which by the way, script vars and local vars are the exact same thing. That was just, they started out being called script vars, and then later on, utunnels changed the name to local vars. But anyway, generally, it's a rule of thumb that you want to allocate about 10 more than you'll actually need. And that's just something that I found through experimentation. So if I think that I'm going to use 50 variables, then I'll allocate 60 just for posterity. And that gives me a little wiggle room, because that, if you run out of variables or allocate one more variable than you've actually allowed yourself, that can cause it's not a true crash, but that causes a no error shutdown. So that's one of those mystery shutdowns where you're like, I'm looking at the log and I don't know what happened, right? So that's pretty much what I go with. I try to figure out how many variables I'm needing. I keep a count of them, and then I just add 10 more to that, and that's what I allocate. I see like a lot of times when somebody, they need 100 variables and they allocate 1,000, you really don't want to do that, because the engine does reserve the memory for however many variables that you do allocate. So don't do that. As a memory saving feature, allocate just a little bit more than what you need and no more than that. can we force the engine to save game by script? Are you talking about force it to use the native save game function, or are you talking about creating your own save system? Native? I think there was a command for that, but I'm not 100% certain. I never use the engine's native save command. I always rely on file streams to make my own database, so I'll just have to do a good old-fashioned code search. So let me switch to the code window here, or the engine code window. Let's see. Let's see if we can find. We'll go to OpenBOR script and see if there's anything about save game. Okay, here is our save game function. So what I'll do is come over here to OpenBOR script and search for it to see if there's anything that. And there is my answer. That would be a big fat no. There is no way to force the native save game function to run. I can show you how to beat that, Malik, to make the custom save file not human readable. A couple of the tricks you can do is use hash codes because the engine can, or not hash codes, use hexadecimal because the engine can read hexadecimal just fine. And one thing that I like to do is put a checksum into my database files so that if somebody tries to mess around with it and they don't know how the checksum file works, then it's just going to blow up in their face and not do anything at all. And that'll keep people from just cheating or reading the file and knowing exactly what's going on. Even if somebody knows how the checksum works, they still have to get in there and do calculations to be able to pull that off. So that's, if you're interested in that, I can maybe throw a tutorial up about how to use hexadecimal in your file stream codes. But yeah, right now there's just no way to trigger the save game function. The engine does it on its own, and that's pretty much it. And for the record, by the way, that's probably not a big deal. It's for me to add as far as giving you the ability to run the save game function, but that's not really going to help you right now. It's because it's not in the current release of the engine. Also a tutorial on screens. I am working on that. Actually, I'm going to switch over to something real quick just to show you here. I'm actually working on an animation system that I didn't want to really show this, but I'm going to go ahead and do it. Let's just do a display capture, or turn on the display capture instead of the window captures. And File Explorer, Documents, GitHub. among my many projects, I had been working on an update to the old Dragons of Rage module, and I want to demonstrate something here real quick that makes use of screens. Now, this probably isn't going to work in real time, but I can at least give you some idea here. Start, new game, let's just test stage 1. Boss test, stage 3. Oh, there it is. So one of the many things that I'd been doing to update this game is a heads-up display that shows everything, or shows all the enemies on the screen at the same time. I'm going to kill off a couple of guys here. And notice that when enemies are defeated and they fade off the screen, the HUD items actually slide over instead of just disappearing. Now, this is something that was in my Golden Axe project as well. I'm just kind of importing it into Dragons of Rage. It uses screens to operate. And let me go back over to the code. The problem is right now is the code that is operating that heads-up display is very much hard-coded for each individual game. I am working on a script library that will be able to plug animations in and create screens on the fly. And as soon as I get that resolved, then I will create a tutorial on how to use it, and in doing so, we'll also create a tutorial on how to use screens in general. And hopefully that will be helpful to you. And on that note, if you don't have any more questions, everyone, I need to, or well, I guess both of you at this point, I need to sign off. I've got some homework to do and, of course, my paid occupation to take care of and some other things, and it is now 1300. So do you have anything else you'd like me to answer real quick before I jump out? All right, then I'm going to take that as a no. Everybody who showed up, thanks, and I will see if I can schedule another one of these for next week. And as time goes on, hopefully I'll get a little more proficient and we'll see less and less silly mistakes. So everybody have a good afternoon. I will see you on the forum and hopefully see you live online this time next Wednesday. Be good, everybody.